So a couple of days ago, I was looking through my camera roll on my phone and went all the way back to the end of 2021. I stumbled upon a mock draft for the 2022 draft, and looking at the guys they had projected to go in the top 10, I thought it'd be kind of cool to revisit this mock draft, see just how bad it was, and where these players all ended up. It's kind of a new concept for a video, but I do hope you guys enjoy it. If you love football content, be sure to take a quick moment to subscribe, leave a like if you want to support my work, and let me know what other crazy topic I could do in my next video. Now let's get started and talk about this random 2022 mock draft and how it ended up turning out. Okay, so the guy that they had ranked number 10 was Kyle Hamilton. He had a pretty crazy story. He ended up being born in the Greek island of Crete. He was the son of a former professional basketball player. His mother was from Korea, and he ended up starting out playing all positions for Marist High School in Georgia. He became such a dominant player for them that Hamilton was ranked as the number 1 safety in the country and a 5-star recruit in the class of 2019. Hamilton would decide to commit to Notre Dame, where he had a tremendous career at the Fighting Irish. As a freshman, he finished with 41 tackles, 6 pass deflections, and 4 picks. As a sophomore, he had 63 tackles, 7 pass deflections, and a pick. And then going into 2021, he was seen as a dark horse Heisman contender. He ended up finishing with 34 tackles, 4 pass deflections, and 3 picks. But no one was throwing the ball Hamilton's way. There was one moment against Florida State where he ran across the entire field and made a crazy play, and that was the moment when I knew Hamilton had real NFL potential. The mock draft was actually somewhat accurate, as Hamilton was eventually taken with the 14th overall pick in the first round in 2022 by the Ravens, and so far, he has lived up to the hype. He was both a Pro Bowler and a first-team All-Pro selection in 2023, and was an All-Rookie team member in 2022. In total, he's finished with 143 tackles in 2 years, and Kyle Hamilton is one of the next great safeties in the NFL. The next guy we need to talk about is Sam Howell. This mock draft had him going number 9 overall, and at one point this looked pretty accurate. Coming out of Waynesville, North Carolina, he ended up going to Sun Valley High School, where he threw for nearly 14,000 yards and 145 touchdowns, while also rushing for nearly 4,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. Because of that, Sam Howell was a top 150 recruit and was as high as the number 3 dual threat quarterback in the class of 2019. After he was originally committed to Florida State, Walt Bell took the head coaching job at UMass, so he would decommit. Mack Brown took the head coaching job at North Carolina, and he would become the focal point of Mack Brown's new Tar Heel era. Instead of getting a chance to sit on the bench right away, Sam Howell would come out and prove to be a menace as a true freshman. He'd end up throwing for 3,641 yards with 38 touchdowns and 7 picks. From that moment on, he was seen as the next great quarterback in college football. In 2020, he lived up to it once again, throwing for 3,600 yards and 30 touchdowns and 7 picks, and had very similar numbers. Going into 2021, he was seen as a Heisman contender and a definite top 5 pick, but he ended up struggling a little bit. He lost some of his key playmakers and lost a lot more games, and in total only threw for 3,000 yards with 24 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, causing his stock to fall a little bit. Honestly, the perfect time for him to declare would have been after the 2020 season, but that was not possible because he had only played 2 years. While the mock draft had him going at number 9 overall, he'd end up going in the 5th round at pick number 144 to the Washington Commanders. While he would only start 1 game in 2022, Howell ended up becoming the guy in 2023. He threw for 4,000 yards with 21 touchdowns, but then also had 21 picks. He had one of the worst offensive lines in NFL history, and honestly, Sam Howell got a little bit screwed. I really do think if he went to the right team, he had a future in the league, but he's going to have to cut out those turnovers. Ultimately, the mock draft was wrong. Sam Howell still made it to the league and started a season in the NFL, so I guess it wasn't too far off. Unlike both Kyle Hamilton and Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder was by no means a big-time recruit coming out of high school. At 15 years old, he was raised by both his mother and his grandma, and would eventually go to the famous St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. As a senior there, he threw for 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns, but was also a dominant force on the ground. At that point, he was considered a 2-star recruit, and would choose to go to Cincinnati over Eastern Kentucky. Well, at the time, Tommy Tuberville was the head coach there. Luke Fickell would decide to honor it and let Ridder come onto the team. After redshirting in 2017, Ridder would start in 2018, throwing for 2,400 yards and 20 touchdowns, and he would continue throughout his 4-year career, being one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He pretty much had the same stat line his first 3 years before he would explode in 2021, throwing for 3,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, and only 8 picks, while leading Cincinnati to a nearly perfect season, a road victory over Notre Dame, and an appearance in the college football as a Group of 5 program. He'll be considered one of the best quarterbacks in school history, but it didn't mean he'd be drafted at number 8 overall. The Atlanta Falcons would eventually decide to take him in the 3rd round, and he would go at pick number 74. Just like Sam Howell, he's gotten an opportunity to try to prove he has a spot in the league, but in total he has started 17 games and has only thrown for 3,544 yards with 14 touchdowns and 12 picks, and with the Falcons signing Kirk Cousins and drafting Michael Penix, he had no future there. Now he's on the Arizona Cardinals, where he'll likely play backup for the rest of his career. So far, this mock draft is super quarterback heavy, as with their next pick at number 7, they had the Giants taking Spencer Rattler, the quarterback from Oklahoma. After going to Pinnacle High School in Phoenix, Spencer Rattler was one of the most controversial names in the class of 2019. While he was the top quarterback recruit, a ton of people wanted to see him fail, and then he'd get a chance to go to Oklahoma, where he would sit as a backup to Jalen Hurts for 1 year. In 2020, Rattler would take over, throwing for 3,000 yards and 28 touchdowns, but 2021 would be a major struggle for him, to be honest. After playing poorly against West Virginia, he was almost booed off the field and was eventually replaced by Caleb Williams in the Red River game. Spencer Rattler never reclaimed the job, and after throwing for 1,400 yards and 11 picks, decided to transfer to South Carolina for the 2022 season, as Caleb Williams then decided to follow his coach to USC. While at South Carolina, he got a fresh start with former Oklahoma coach Shane Beamer, and with new opportunities, Rattler was pretty decent in 2022. He threw for 3,000 yards with 18 touchdowns and 12 picks, and led South Carolina to one of their most fun seasons in a long time. He could have declared for the 2023 NFL Draft, but would decide to come back and tried to have a super year. Unfortunately, it did and didn't work out for him. While his stats did improve, South Carolina lost a lot more games, and he didn't have the kind of improvement needed to make a huge push to get drafted early in the NFL. Rattler was still seen as probably the best mid-tier quarterback prospect, and eventually the New Orleans Saints would take him with the 150th overall pick in the 5th round. We don't really know what's going to happen to Rattler this fall, but everyone's mock drafts were wrong. Rattler became a 5th round pick in 2024 instead of being a top 10 selection in 2022. Up next, the mock draft had Derek Stingley Jr. going at number 6 to the Jets. Going back in time, Stingley was always seen as the next big thing. His dad played in the Arena Football League, and his grandpa played with the New England Patriots, so Stingley had a lot of people to look up to. After going to the Dunham School in Baton Rouge, he had 27 career interceptions, was named the Louisiana Gatorade Football Player of the Year, and was the number 2 overall recruit in the country. He would arrive at LSU with a ridiculous amount of hype, and as a true freshman in 2019 would finish with 38 tackles and 15 pass deflections. Stingley was a superstar as a freshman, and he also played on special teams. In 2020, his numbers would go down a bit, as he only finished with 27 tackles and 5 pass deflections, and then in 2021 he would get hurt, so he barely got an opportunity to play. 2021 LSU was a little bit of a mess, but teams did not really care that Stingley didn't play, as he was eventually taken with the 3rd overall pick in the 1st round by the Houston Texans. This was a huge get for the Texans. He started in 9 games as a rookie, finishing with 43 tackles, and then this past year, he started in 11 games, finishing with 39 tackles. In total, he's also had a sack, 18 pass deflections, and maybe he's been a little bit underwhelming, but honestly, he still has a ton of untapped potential, and it is too early to know where his career will take him. The mock draft was actually wrong, as Stingley would go higher than they expected. At number 5, the Cincinnati Bengals were supposed to select George Karlaftis, a defensive lineman from Purdue. Karlaftis has a pretty crazy story, as both him and his brother were big-time recruits, and they even played water polo for the Greek national team. They'd end up moving to the United States when he was 13 years old, and they would settle in West Lafayette, Indiana, just a couple of miles from the Purdue Stadium. It was pretty obvious that he would end up going to Purdue, and at the time, Karlaftis was a 5-star recruit and the number 27 player in the country. He was the biggest recruit in the Jeff Brom era, and Karlaftis would live up to the hype while he was there. As a true freshman in 2019, he'd end up finishing with 54 tackles, 2 pass deflections, 7.5 sacks, a fumble and an interception, and he was a freak of nature for them. In 2020, injuries would limit him to just 4 total tackles, but in 2021, he'd once again come out strong. He'd finished with 36 total tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 2 pass deflections, and 4.5 sacks. Karlaftis was more of an interior defensive lineman though, so based on his size, technique, and his good production, he was seen as a future 1st round pick. That is exactly what would end up happening, as he was taken with the 30th overall selection in the 1st round by the Kansas City Chiefs in 2022. As a rookie, he'd end up finishing with 33 total tackles, with 6 sacks and 7 pass deflections. He was truly a disruptor for them, and in 2023 he got even better, finishing with 47 tackles, 10.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and 3 pass deflections. George Karlaftis looks to be one of the next great interior linemen in the NFL, is with a really good franchise, and has totally lived up to the hype. While he ended up falling in the draft compared to the mock draft, Karlaftis has lived up to being drafted at number 5 in my eyes. At number 4, we have to talk about Andrew Booth Jr., who was supposed to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. Coming out of high school, Booth was always a big deal, as while at Archer, he ended up becoming a top 50 recruit and the number 5 corner in the country. He finished with 162 tackles and 13 interceptions during his career, and some sites listed him as a 5-star and others as a 4. He would end up going to Clemson, where he'd play 13 games as a true freshman in 2019, and the most notable moment came when he punched a player at Louisville. This was the biggest stain on his resume, but Booth would luckily bounce back from that, as he finished with 27 tackles and 4 pass deflections in 2020, and then 37 tackles, 5 pass deflections, and 3 picks in 2021. He was a first-team All-ACC selection, and while at times he was projected as a first-round pick, he sort of fell by the end of it and ended up going with pick number 42 to the Minnesota Vikings in round 2. Since he's gotten to the NFL, Booth has honestly been underwhelming. He played in 6 games as a rookie, finishing with 12 tackles, and then this past year he played in 17 games, totaling 8 tackles. Booth has not yet been able to get his footing in the league, and it looks like at this point he will go down as a bust. There still is time, but putting Andrew Booth as the 4th best player in the 2022 draft class seems to be a little bit of a mistake in retrospect. It seems like every recruiting class, there is that one offensive lineman who ends up being a 5-star recruit, plays 3 years, and then goes in the top 10. For the 2022 draft class, that was Evan Neal. After coming out of IMG Academy, the 6'7" freak of nature decided to go to Alabama and was listed as a top 10 recruit. He started 13 games at left guard during his freshman year before he would eventually move to right tackle in 2020. He would start all that year and win a national championship, and then after 2021, he would start again and then declare for the draft. He was a consensus All-American and a first-team All-ACC player, and was eventually drafted at pick number 7 overall by the New York Giants. Sadly, as a rookie, he would deal with an MCL sprain late in the season, but he would still play 13 games. But honestly, he's been under the microscope a ton, as him and the fans have gone at it. Some people want him cut, some people want him to move positions, and so far he's struggled with injuries and just being able to adjust. I wouldn't say Evan Neal has been a complete bust, but he's really going to have to figure it out over these next few years, and honestly a fresh start from New York might be the best thing for him. While he went at pick number 7 overall, I think it was a little high to think that Neal will be the number 3 selection. The guy who was projected to go number 2 overall was Kayvon Thibodeaux. After becoming the number 1 recruit in the country, Thibodeaux had a pretty crazy journey. He originally went to Susan Miller Dorsey High School for 2 years before he then went to Oaks Christian. As I said, he was the number 1 player in the country after finishing with 152 tackles and 54 sacks during his career. He eventually decided to commit to Oregon over USC and Stanford, and then was named the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year after an incredible first year with the Ducks. He finished with 35 tackles, 3 pass deflections, 9 sacks, and a fumble, and in 2020, he'd have pretty similar numbers. This time he'd finish with 38 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 3 sacks, and then in 2021, he would improve all those numbers once again, finishing with 49 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 7 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. Everyone knew that Kayvon Thibodeaux was an NFL player, but some questioned his motor and some questioned his character, but it still really didn't end up mattering, as he would be taken with a number 5 overall pick in the first round by the New York Giants. So far, Thibodeaux has played 2 years in the NFL and has totaled 99 tackles, 5 forced fumbles, 15.5 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries, and 9 pass deflections. He was named to the All-Rookie team in 2022, and it looks like the sky is going to be the limit for him. So far, he has been able to keep himself out of trouble, and the mock draft wasn't too far off on him. Finally, we get to the guy who was the victim of the Patrick Mahomes effect. Malik Willis was never that good, but because of the attention Mahomes got, everyone was trying to find the next quarterback like him, and Malik Willis was pegged as the number 1 overall pick at one point. After going to Westlake High School, he eventually transferred to Roswell for his senior year. He ended up throwing for 2,500 yards and also ran for over 1,000 yards with 37 total touchdowns. After originally committing to play for Virginia Tech, he would flip his commitment to Auburn and was just a 3-star recruit and the number 23 athlete in the country. After not getting an opportunity to do anything at Auburn in both 2017 and 2018, he would then transfer to Liberty. He would sit out the 2019 season before in 2020 he would eventually take over. Willis would end up showing a lot of potential during the 2020 season as he threw for 2,200 yards and 20 touchdowns and also ran for 944 yards and 14 touchdowns. If he could have a big 2021 campaign, then maybe he could be that number 1 overall pick. He'd end up improving his numbers as he'd throw for 2,800 yards and then 27 scores, plus running for nearly 900 yards and 13 scores on the ground. but many were worried that Willis was just more of an athlete, and some questioned his level of competition, so he'd end up falling to the 3rd round, where he was taken at pick number 86 by the Tennessee Titans. Eventually, he would be given his opportunity to start games, as a rookie he'd go 1-2 in the 3 games he started, and just did not look very good. In 2023, he only ended up playing in 3 games, and in total in 2 years, he's thrown for 350 yards with 3 interceptions. He did have 1 rushing score, but Malik Willis will go down as a bust, and a guy who in my opinion was screwed over. He was never that good, and now he'll be labeled as a bust, and people are going to be negative about him, even though he should have never been in that position to begin with. That's just my take though. But yeah, today we took a look at a crazy 2022 mock draft, and 3 years later, things have really changed. While they were spot on a couple of players, they were really off on some, and they had too many quarterbacks. The 2022 rookie quarterback class was historically awful, and you should check out my video about that on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.